Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is all about getting prepared for the Procurement Act 2023. Today is the final webinar of our partner series, where we have invited our partners to come on and discuss key topics with us on their areas of expertise. So do head over to our YouTube channel to watch our previous episodes, which contain loads of interesting discussions on a wide range of sustainability focused topics. So please do check those out. Today, you might be viewing this on a range of different platforms. It might be YouTube, LinkedIn. So wherever you're viewing us from, please do drop a comment in the normal sort of comments box on your platform and let us know where you're joining us from today. And of course, we do encourage interaction on our webinars. So please do drop some questions in for myself and Ella today. So today you do have me. I'm Bryony Salter, the Head of Sustainability at Positive Planet. For those of you who don't already know us, we support organisations to measure and reduce their carbon emissions, comply with tenders and net zero targets, and engage stakeholders such as suppliers, employees through a range of tools, including our carbon literacy training. And today I'm joined by Ella Grant, Managing Director of Advice Cloud. Ella, do you want to give an introduction to Advice Cloud for anyone who doesn't already know what you guys do?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So Advice Cloud are UK public procurement specialists, and we work with buyers and suppliers to get innovative technology into the public sector. On the supply side, we have an experienced bid team working with our clients to help them win contracts. And we also work with several very established advisors from within the public sector who provide various strategy and training services.
Thanks, Ella. So on the agenda today, just briefly, what we're covering: what is the Procurement Act 2023? Who is it going to affect? And how sustainability can help you to comply with legislation and win those tenders, and then overcoming some of the potential barriers to engaging in sustainable procurement. So firstly, what is the Procurement Act 2023?
Okay, so the new regulations will continue to govern how public authorities procure goods and services. They're replacing the Procurement Regulations 2015, which were based on EU directives. And the new act is going to impact most public authorities in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, in some cases, Scotland, as well as public undertakings and private utilities. Um, there are some exemptions to this, so devolved Scottish authorities and some sort of highly secure organisations like the Security Service, Secret Intelligence Service, and such. But most buyers that you might be engaging with as suppliers are going to be held to this new legislation. Within the private sector, the regulations will apply to any business from the UK or from a treaty state who are navigating selling to the public sector. So again, that is most businesses. The regulations themselves have been in formation since 2020, so since post-Brexit. And throughout a 3-year period, government has been seeking public consultation and met with various public and private stakeholder groups to consider whether legislation should be changed to better suit the needs of the UK. And after going through quite a lengthy parliamentary approval process and some amendments to the legislation, it was eventually approved in October 2023. We were expecting the Act to go live in October 2024, but there was an emergency extension announced in September that has now pushed this timeline to the 24th of February 2025, so in about 3 months' time. And we have heard that this has caused some challenges in the market, particularly where there were procurements expected to be run under the new legislation, and those have now been delayed until the new year. But the positive spin on this is that both public and private organisations have a little bit more time to learn about the upcoming changes and how they can adapt to these. And we're finding this is particularly welcome from suppliers and especially SMEs who are looking to better understand how sustainability and social value will become more pertinent to their efforts to win public sector business. So the Procurement Act 2023 positions sustainability as a fundamental component of public procurement, encouraging contracting authorities to integrate environmental and social considerations at every stage. And this goes far beyond the current regulations, which only talks about considering these outcomes. And often other legislation is relied on to really integrate this, for example, the Public Services Social Value Act 2012. So a few specific areas where this is really drawn out in the Act. In the key principles, there are key objectives, key principles, including delivering value for money, as well as maximising public benefit. And within this specific objective, it incorporates sustainability and social value as a key consideration, taking a much wider view of what could benefit society and the environment. And also just to note, it's not on the slide here, but the objectives also now include a requirement to have regard for the barriers that SMEs may face to participation and considering where those barriers might be removed or reduced, which is great news. A new exclusion has been added, now giving buyers the ability to exclude suppliers on the basis of environmental misconduct. So this may well prevent some suppliers from being able to participate in tenders. Meet to mat is a big change, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But this change in how tenders are evaluated is going to allow buyers to take a much broader view of value to include social and environmental outcomes. Life cycle costing. So it's now encouraged as part of the evaluation process to consider the full lifetime cost of a product or service, including environmental costs. And this is likely going to be quite significant when we're thinking about hardware in terms of technology, construction, and other industries with high levels of carbon emissions and waste. And then finally, supplier performance. So there is a new requirement for authorities to publish contract performance reports for contracts that are over 5 million. And this will be reporting on at least 3 agreed KPIs. So this may well include environmental measures if it's appropriate to the contract. And these reports will be public, and suppliers with poor performance might be excluded from future tenders, or obviously their contract terminated. So I mentioned that some procurements have been delayed, and what I'm capturing here is a list of Crown Commercial Service frameworks that were due to open sort of this side of January, and they've now been delayed until post-February. This is not just tech frameworks, which is our speciality, but all the ones that have been delayed. Two significant ones in our world is Technology Services 4 and Digital Outcomes and Specialists 7, which are now due in March. Some of the ones here you can see are still TBC. But just to note that there are well over 1,000 frameworks out there beyond Crown Commercial Service. So this is by no means capturing all of the delays that might be occurring. So if you are working in more niche spaces, some local government frameworks, health-based frameworks, it would be worth doing a little bit of research into how your pipeline might have shifted there.
Thank you, Ella. Hopefully, can everyone still hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bryony.
Grand. I noticed that my video froze, so and I can't seem to fix it, so I do apologize for that. So how sustainability can help you to comply with legislation and win tenders. So firstly, just a sort of broader look at the Procurement Act and how it's helping. There are sort of sustainability wins across it, not only for the and social aspects, but for the businesses themselves as well. So firstly, there's now a simplified procurement framework, reducing complexity for authorities and suppliers, which likely means that this is going to be more accessible for SMEs, which often have more of a sort of direct impact on their local communities. meet to match, which has already been explained, and I'll go into a bit more on the next slide, means that there will be greater opportunities for businesses with strong environmental and social credentials to compete effectively, and not having to compromise on their values, their quality, and their impact to become the lowest cost. With mandatory sustainability and social value considerations in awarding contracts, suppliers will be held accountable for delivering them throughout the whole contract, as sort of Ella's discussed in the previous slide. Focus on resilience and innovation. So the sort of new framework will reward forward-thinking businesses investing in innovative solutions and increasing resilience across their own value chain and in turn the buyer's value chain. Alignment with global standards. So this ensures that compliance across global sustainability and ethical procurement practices, which helps UK businesses to address both global issues and remain competitive outside of maybe the UK tender that they're going for. Digital procurement, so streamlining submission, evaluation, and award processes, which facilitates easier tracking of sustainability and compliance data and reduces waste and inefficiencies throughout the whole tendering process and throughout the contract. Stronger enforcement and accountability. So authorities will have better tools and frameworks to enforce contract terms, including their sustainability commitments. So as sort of Ella was talking about previously, they will be able to enforce throughout the sort of term of the contract better. And increased transparency with stricter requirements for open data and reporting to reduce corruption. It'll also ensure implementation of sustainability and social value commitments, enhancing trust in the project and reducing opportunities for greenwashing, but also a sort of newer term, social washing, or an overstatement of impacts throughout the contract. So businesses must adapt by prioritising social value, environmental responsibility, and digital readiness to remain competitive in public sector tenders going forwards. So a little bit more on meet to mat and how this unlocks sustainability across the supply chain for public sector. The big difference for sustainability when the Act comes in will lie with the legal requirement for public sector buyers to shift from awarding contracts based on the most economically advantageous tender to just the most advantageous. So they're broadening the scope of what it means to be good value for money. And that means considering the wider benefits for the community in which the contract will be delivered, such as creating local employment opportunities, reducing carbon emissions, or using a local supply chain, all of which help to contribute to the UK's national strategic priorities, such as job creation, improving supplier resilience, driving innovation, and of course, achieving net zero. So in practice, the sort of MAT evaluation framework means that we will see fewer and fewer tenders with high weightings on price and more tenders with higher weightings on social, environmental, technical innovation elements that add to the organisation, its stakeholders, and the local and global community. So sustainability really needs to be close to the top of your list of priorities from the very sort of inception of a new project. And to help with that, central government or for central government tenders, the UK government develops a social value model, which was first issued back in 2020, but it's a framework that helps public sector buyers choose which questions to ask their suppliers to help differentiate between them based on societal impact. So if you have ever wondered why you see loads of the same questions across tenders, this could be why. There's the sort of set social value model that central government at least are working towards. and it contains 5 themes, 8 outcomes, and 28 different criteria. So those are the 28 different questions on there that procurers can ask. And if you do want more information about that, there's loads of guidance, advice on how to align to the social value model on the government's website. So there's a link in the top of the slides, which we'll get at the end of the session. And just to quickly mention as well, and I think Ella might be mentioning this a bit further, but local government authorities tend to use the alternative social value TOM system, which is compatible not just with social value model, but other frameworks too, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it might be what you tend to see more often across local government tenders. And you can find out more on the Social Value Portal website. So for us at Positive Planet, the key sort of part of the social value model that we focus on for our clients is the fighting climate change section. So what questions might you be asked about in tenders? It might include things like asking about your waste management, your energy efficiency, your employee travel, for example. So do you have a fleet of electric vehicles, perhaps? How are they commuting to work? Do you have any incentives in to support them to commute more sustainably, whether it's subsidising public transport, for example? Who your energy provider is and whether or not you use renewable energy. That's often quite an easy one to be able to do for organisations, and we're seeing more and more businesses having 100% renewable energy tariffs, for example. And it's becoming sort of more and more feasible to have renewable energy technologies on site. So that might be solar panels, for example. Can you include that in your tender? How sustainable is your transport? So I mentioned electric vehicles, but do you consider emissions when choosing a distribution partner or courier? So even if that's just you're sending things out via Royal Mail, for example, or DHL, are they able to provide you with your emissions? Are they on a journey towards net zero, and can you evidence that within your tender? How do you encourage staff to conserve energy and enhance sustainability within their roles? So there might be something in there about training provided to staff. There might be something in personal development plans and career progression around sustainability and how the individual contributes to your journey as an organisation towards sustainability and perhaps net zero. What happens to products at the end of their life? Can they be recycled, reused, composted? Do you think about that when you're designing new products? Can they be taken apart, for example, and repaired easily rather than, throwing away the whole thing and buying new? Having sustainability embedded within your product design will be a really important part of any tender that's product related. How do you choose and engage with your suppliers to enhance sustainable outcomes? Do you have a sustainable procurement policy, for example? So, how are you going out to engage with your suppliers? Do they know about your sustainability journey and what's going to be expected of them over the coming years? Are you asking them for emissions data? Do you have a way to track the sort of reductions, hopefully, in their emissions over time? So how you're engaging with those suppliers is really important with what important as well, and how you're collaborating with them for sort of shared sustainable goals. And just some example metrics really down the side of this slide. Obviously, measuring your business emissions can be quite a crucial one, or your product carbon emissions. Maybe people hours spent on protecting the environment. So that could be volunteering days spent out on local projects, number of green spaces created throughout a contract, reduction in energy, water, and waste, percentage of your suppliers with net zero targets, or percentage of your employees that are trained perhaps on carbon literacy, for example. So there's loads of different ways that you can bring metrics throughout your whole business into a tender. And one that is coming up a lot on tenders, so particularly if the contract is worth over 5 million, you will be asked for a carbon reduction plan. And we're seeing that now across tenders worth less than that, particularly the NHS, for example. They require a CRP or carbon reduction plan for all new procurements. And what this means is that you have to measure your carbon emissions across what are called scope 1, 2, and a subset of scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. Now, you don't fully need to know what all of these are at this point in time, but just briefly, scope 1 is your direct emissions from sources owned, controlled by you as the reporting organisation. So that might be your gas boilers, for example, or any combustion vehicles, so petrol, diesel vehicles that are owned by the organisation. Scope 2 is your indirect emissions from the purchase of electricity, and also any electric vehicles that you might have. I think I'm having audio issues, I believe. Can you hear me okay, Ella?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. It might just be others that are having difficulty hearing me. And scope 3, there are 15 categories in scope 3, but you need to just include 5 of those for tenders at the moment for a carbon reduction plan. So those are business travel, employee commuting, waste, and upstream and downstream transportation and distribution. So that means any distribution that you or your clients are paying for. And we're expecting very much for these requirements to be expanded over the next few years, as we're already seeing through the NHS, which seems to be a bit ahead of everyone else, requiring all suppliers to report their full scope 3 emissions from April 2027. So that will be all 15 categories of scope 3, not just the 5 that we need currently. And sort of last thing from me on this, obviously accreditation, sustainability ratings and memberships can act as a really good way to evidence sustainability in your submission. More than that, I suppose, is that they can provide you with a framework to take you on your sustainability journey and support you on that and give you the accountability that you need to actually, do the initiatives and take the action that you said you will. It's the answers and the actions that you're able to input into your tenders that the buyer will care about most, not necessarily which one of these you choose, as there are so many now on the market. But do look for accreditations most suited to your business, your industry, and that you think will give you as an organization the best structure to help you keep accountable to your sustainability targets. That's it from me.
Thank you. So we've spoken a little bit about frameworks. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some considerations of how you might want to align to those. So the first key point is that while the Act is going to apply to all new contracts after 24th of February, and that will include any new frameworks or dynamic purchasing systems that are brought to the market, it is worth knowing that the previous regulations are going to continue to apply to any call of contracts awarded via existing frameworks. So I mentioned that some frameworks at the moment, because the new iterations have been delayed, those frameworks have actually been extended till up to 2026, I think, in the most extreme cases. So that means that any tenders that you might be submitting via that framework is still going to be evaluated under the MEET rules rather than MAT. So that means that it still might be for a little while that the price of your solution is more of a key consideration, and social value and environment might not appear in such a prominent way. And that will give you more time to adapt your value proposition to the new regulations. But if you are on lots of different frameworks, just something to bear in mind that the approach might be slightly different for a year or so as things start to shift into the new regulations. Bryony spoke about carbon reduction plans just now, and they are required for contracts of 5 million or more, but this also includes for framework applications if it's determined that contracts might regularly be over this value. So we are seeing this as a requirement for most frameworks other than G-Cloud in the tech world, to make sure it's still, pretty accessible for SMEs, but I think that is going to be introduced next year to an extent anyway. So even if you're not bidding for contracts directly, it is still usually a requirement just to get access to the framework. So if you have any future frameworks on your radar, do consider the timelines of this. And we really recommend starting building a carbon reduction plan as early as possible to avoid that panic, that rush during the tender period. And then finally, when you are assessing potential frameworks to get listed on, have a look at who the key buyers are and consider how they might assess your solutions differently. So for some CCS frameworks, buyers tend to be majority central government, although they are used by buyers from throughout public sector. But in central government, they are mandated to apply a 10% weighting to social value in most circumstances. There are some cases where it's determined it doesn't apply, but in most cases it will be minimum 10%. For lots of other frameworks, though, it might be that the key buyers are local government, health, education, blue light. And for them and for local government in particular, we've seen tenders where social value is weighted as high as 60%. It's understandable, it's common for location-specific buyers to consider much more the positive impact on their local communities. So if you're targeting local government from February, that does need to be a strategic consideration. And you can have a look at buyers' published social value policies on their websites. They're not always easy to find, but they are there in most cases. So you can have a look at what their priorities are for their local community and consider where you might be able to align your commitments there.
Fantastic. So just a quick reminder, I can see that we have people across YouTube and LinkedIn. If you do have any comments, just leave those in the normal sort of comments space on whichever platform you're in, and we will see those come through. But yes, the slides will be available for attendees following the webinar, so not to worry on that front. So the business case for investing in sustainability. So not only is it beneficial for tenders and to win you additional work, but there are a whole host of other benefits of getting involved in this. So increased brand trust, recognition, and ultimately more sales, with 1 in 4 consumers switching to more sustainable companies. 32% of consumers have also claimed that their trust in brands would be improved if they did have transparent, accountable, and socially and environmentally responsible supply chains. So it can have a huge impact on your brand, and bringing more consumers your way. And equally, if you don't have this at all, you might be switching off a whole host of potential buyers from wanting to purchase from you. Businesses can tap into new markets and customer segments that value sustainability. So we're seeing a hugely rapidly growing green economy, and demands for sustainable products, services are only increasing. Pursuing zero can drive innovation, leading to development of new products, services, and business models. So we're actually seeing this across quite a few of our clients, in that they've gone down the sustainability route. It might be for a tender, it might be for other reasons. It might purely be because they're wanting to reduce environmental impact, and reduce their emissions, but they've seen a whole new market, a whole new set of customers that they're able now to approach, because they've got products and services and more efficient business models that that are appropriate for those new consumers. More likely to attract and retain talent. So a Deloitte survey uncovered that 69% of employees want their companies to invest in sustainability efforts. We certainly see this a lot across our own organisation. We have no shortage of people messaging us wanting to work for us, which is fantastic. And people do, the world's a sort of confusing place at the moment with all sorts of things going on, and people really want to feel that in their role they're having an impact, a positive impact, and that they're working for a purpose. So we're seeing that more and more. So whether that purpose is environmental or social, having that purpose is really, really important to attract and retain talent. Governments and organisations often provide financial incentives, grants, and subsidies for businesses pursuing net zero goals. Um, we've seen a little bit of a drop off in that with sort of Brexit and changes over in government, but that will hopefully all start to increase going forwards again. And building sustainable supply chains can reduce vulnerability to disruptions caused by climate related events. So, this is really quite an important one, and we've seen a lot of impact on this front over the last few years. So, it might be drought happening on the continent in Europe that means we're not able to access the same sort of products that we normally would, or they've increased price significantly. It might be flooding, mean that the sort of distribution route isn't actually available anymore, and we're having to do other things. There are all sorts of reasons why climate related events are impacting our supply chain. So recognizing that, understanding the risks involved, and adapting your supply chain to be more resilient for as and when those events happen is really, really important.
So to address some of the barriers, which are very real, especially for SMEs, to building sustainability into their business, and as an SME ourselves and working with hundreds of SME tech suppliers, these are the 8 main barriers that we've seen to engaging in sustainability. So the first is lack of capital to invest. Becoming more sustainable is often seen as a significant investment, and in some cases that will be true. However, there are lots of low-cost ways that you can begin engaging if you are just starting out. We've mentioned working on a carbon reduction plan, working with people at Positive Planet. That is not a substantial investment, and it will give you invaluable information about your baseline position and starting to come up with ideas of proposed activities that you can implement to reduce your emissions over time. And then, of course, you can build those into a project plan, cost them up, budget for them in the years to come. But even less than that, considering really easy wins like bike to work schemes, sustainability related volunteer days, or choosing local suppliers for your basic supplies. They are all really low cost ways to get started. Lack of time is obviously a huge barrier for SMEs in particular. If you don't have a dedicated ESG person or team, it can be really hard to figure out who is going to push this forward. Our advice would be to consider establishing an informal green team or a green champion within the organisation who can help to progress those initial stages, and hopefully with some support from senior leadership. You might have people in your organisation already who are highly motivated by this type of work and would love to be involved. And I think it is worth pointing out that in terms of working with the public sector, this does naturally take a lot of time and investment. So that's kind of unavoidable, but you will save time in that by having a really strong sense of your target market and a really good qualification process, so that you aren't wasting lots of time trying to win work that you aren't best placed for at this time. A shortage in subject knowledge and expertise. Again, you might lack a dedicated internal expert, but you might have people internally who are really interested in being involved in this type of business development, and that is something that you can leverage. There are lots of accessible consultancies out there, like us, obviously, who offer, low-cost ways of accessing their expertise, but also publish loads of really useful content on their website. And also government has published a wealth of resources online, lots of policies and strategies, which can be a good place to start upskilling for those who need it. Leadership buy-in. So we usually see this when the business is very revenue and profit driven, and sustainability is seen either as a nice to have or a distraction, or, in worst case, just not important. As a starting point, hopefully you have some information from this webinar to start building a simple business case as to why sustainability does matter and the positive impact it can have on your business. And of course, it is going to be key if you are looking to work with the public sector from February onwards. Being too busy stuck in business as usual, I think we all know this is quite common, but it clearly isn't a useful mindset to have. The most successful suppliers are always innovating, always improving their services and their ways of working. So it is just core to being able to compete with them in an ever-changing market, to consider the areas that you can change for the better. Prioritizing other areas of the business. I've touched on this a little bit already in terms of, regards to revenue and profit, but there might be other very valid areas that need your focus, such as your IT, people and culture, customer satisfaction. As I've said, I think the best place to start with sustainability is coming up with an informed action plan that's data driven, and then putting down some really realistic timelines of when you think things can be actioned. And progress might be slower for some companies than others, and that's okay. But there will be easy wins that you can identify and get started and start talking about that positive impact that you're having. And obviously, in terms of prioritization, we do need to hold in mind that the issue of sustainability is extremely high priority in a global sense, and everyone does have their part to play in this. And then finally, lack of understanding of the opportunities available. We've hopefully shed a bit more light on that today, even looking at recruitment and retention, and clearly actual contract opportunities within the public sector are there, and you winning that will really hinge on your approach to sustainability and social value. From our perspective, it will be really interesting to start looking at the tenders that are released after February and how these aspects are being drawn in and prioritised a lot more. And you can do that too. That information is obviously all public. You can start to assess to what extent you're able to potentially access those opportunities with your current setup, or what gaps you might have that you can address in the short, medium term. Great. And just to briefly talk a little bit about Advice Cloud. If you want to know more about us, you can email us at inquiries@advice-cloud.co.uk, or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can go from there. I've mentioned we support on all aspects of the public procurement process on the buy side and the supply side. But if you are a supplier, that will usually involve bid support, so actually tendering and winning contracts, strategy planning, so looking at your sales and marketing approach from a public sector perspective, framework applications, and there are a lot coming up in the new year, essential training like this, as well as how frameworks work, the actual regulations themselves, and a lot more. So do get in touch.
Thanks, Ella. And apologies, everyone, that I haven't been able to get my video to start working again. We've just got, I think, a minute or two to go through a couple of questions, if we can. So Libby's asked, do you think in the future we will see PPN 0621 and the carbon reduction plan mandated and become common practice for contracts under £5 million moving forwards? So certainly from my perspective, yes, we're seeing that already across the clients that we work with. And obviously I mentioned the likes of the NHS, which will be expanding, not just, carbon reduction plans are already required, but they'll be expanding the scope of those as well. So the requirements for emissions that you're going to need to include in your reporting. So there's only one way I see all of this going, is that more and more businesses are going to have to start producing carbon reduction plans and expand the scope that's included within those. Ella, do you have anything to add to that one?
Um, I think it's very possible. You know, as within the regulations, there's requirements around proportionality to the contract in terms of what they ask of suppliers. That has to be proportionate, and also non-discriminatory. So they can't add unnecessary barriers to SMEs from participating. So that might be a barrier to them extending the requirement for a carbon reduction plan further. I know for G Club 15 that's coming up in July next year, I think they are looking to restrict that just to hosting services at the moment, rather than also software and support. But we'll see. So yeah, it will be interesting for sure to see if they are able to widen the scope of that while navigating what it says in the regs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, producing a carbon reduction plan isn't as daunting as it might sound either. You will already have access to all the data you will need. It might not be good quality in the first year you're reporting, and we work with clients to improve on that year on year. But it is relatively straightforward process to develop out a carbon reduction plan, and there is the government template online for that. Um, so it's not too much of a barrier, maybe somewhat for those smaller organizations as well to actually produce one. Um, so we're 2 minutes over. Let's just have a double check if we have. No, Libby's just said thank you for that. There's a couple more questions, but I think if we get back to people individually about those, that would be best, because we don't want to run too much over time. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining today's session. The slides and recording will be sent out in follow-up email, along with some links to continue the conversation with us and with Advice Cloud. This was the final webinar in our partner series, but we'll be back in the new year with an all-new webinar series, so keep an eye out across our social channels for that. Ella, thank you very much for joining us today. I think it's hopefully been really useful for attendees, and thank you to everyone for listening, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.